Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. To anyone who's new here, my name is Srijana and I'm coming to you from Toronto in Canada. Sorry guys, it's been a few days since I last uploaded. There's been a lot going on in terms of work, just a whole lot of miscellaneous things, world events, following the news like crazy. It's all piled up. So I'm coming to you guys after a few days, but with a very, very interesting topic nonetheless. So today I am going to talk about my experience with IELTS, the English language test that I did for coming to Canada, and a language test that's really popular around the world with students, with migrants, and this scorecard is applicable in a whole host of situations and circumstances, and is rather popular as well. So with me, to the whole IELTS examination prospect, or the possibility of me doing IELTS, came to the fore only when I really decided to move to Canada. I'd never really done it. In fact, it was my first English language test. I did my studies in India itself, my bachelor's as well as my master's degree, so I didn't necessarily need, or I didn't ever need to do an English language test of sorts. So it was only when I decided to come to Canada that I realized that I will now need an IELTS scorecard. Now, going back a little bit, my English language abilities were always good. In fact, a lot of people in my workplace said my language was unnecessarily complex, my writing especially. There were a lot of situations and circumstances where I really had to tone it down because my workplace did require, a lot of writing, sort of legal, within diplomatic peripheries, a lot of writing. So my language was, my writing in particular was fairly impeccable, I'd say, and a lot of times I was in fact asked to tone it down. A lot of people also call me Mrs. Tharoor, which is reference to Shashi Tharoor, who, if you haven't heard of him, is an Indian politician who is just remarkable with his oratory skills, use of language, and just the efficacy of his oratory skills, really. So he is a stellar speaker, and to have any sort of association with him, even if in a moment of jest, is an honor to me. So but in the workplace, I did have a reputation for language that was complex, and for using new words and stuff like that, because I always liked the English language. From my early days, I had a special sort of penchant for words, for a clever turn of phrase. Whenever I was reading something, if there was a line that I particularly liked, I always took a moment or so to really soak it in and process it, and oftentimes wrote it down and made a very conscious effort to make it a part of my active vocabulary. So this is quite a process. And whenever people talk to me about speaking skills and expanding their vocabulary a bit, I tell them that it is a process. It doesn't happen miraculously overnight, and it's not that just because you're enthused about it for a few days you try and increase complexity of it somehow. It just doesn't work. It has to be a more long-term, sustained, consistent process, as with any new skill or with any new thing that you're trying to do. So coming back to me doing IELTS, I will also, for those of you who don't know, by profession I'm also an immigration practitioner. I have an immigration consultancy firm that I run out of Toronto in Canada. So I advise people on IELTS, the run-up to the BR process to Canada all the time, and one of the very, very important parameters, of course, is language proficiency or acquaintance with the English language. So if you are coming to Canada or wanting to come to Canada as a permanent resident or on PR, then the IELTS you will need is General IELTS. And if you are planning to come as a student or study anywhere, you will require academic IELTS. IRCC, of course, has said now that they're also going to accept General IELTS for academic purposes, but until now there was a very, very clear bifurcation, which is academic IELTS for purposes of studying or academics, as is sort of self-explanatory, and General IELTS for purposes of migration. So the IELTS that I attempted was General IELTS. So I was in Mumbai when I decided to move to Canada, working and living in Mumbai, and so I'd never given an English language test before this ever, and so I booked a venue in Mumbai. So I went via British Council. So it was a fairly streamlined process. Book your slot, and then I had to wait for about 4 weeks because there's always such a rush for IELTS. And I guess also just for the number of things and places it's required, there's always a rush for IELTS in all centers in India. That's what I've heard. So I booked mine in Mumbai. Fairly straightforward process. The thing cost about 12,500 or something like that. You book it and then you wait 4 weeks and then you go to the physical venue and then attempt the test. All 3 modules happen on one day. 3 modules happen on one day rather, which is listening, writing, and reading. Right, so these happen on one day, and then speaking happens the next day with an actual sort of invigilator or test taker in a venue that is given to you in advance. So that was the process. I'm not quite someone who prepares in advance. I only do well under pressure, and I'm quite unfortunately the last minute person. So and also because I was fairly confident with my English language skills, I figured I wouldn't require a whole lot of preparation, which in hindsight didn't serve me too well. But anyway, I decided to wait until the last week to prepare. I also was working, so there was a lot of work that had to be done. I was always did long hours and stuff, which not particularly proud of looking back, but my working hours were fairly long. There was a lot going on, and so 1 week to me was I thought was enough preparation. So I waited it out, and then the last week, or not even a week actually, 4 or 5 days is what I took to prepare. So British Council gave me test booklets. It also gave me CDs. There was a whole lot of material online on YouTube, etc. That I actually used to prepare for the test. But bear in mind, all this time, not as sort of active test preparation, but as part of my normal routine, I was always writing and I was reading a lot. But I did, targeted reading. So I was reading fairly quality pieces of writing to make sure that that I was possibly sort of imbibing great words, or subconsciously working on the complexity of my vocabulary, etc. I remember that time reading The Hindu, this one newspaper in India, a lot. The editorial section in particular had these writings and these pieces on really diverse issues. The complexity of writing was great. The research was good. These topics were relevant and very, very, some of the very popular sort of test practice topics as well. So that served me really well. So that was Hindu editorial. Also all other newspapers, just the editorial section in particular is very dense with sort of rich matter, well written, great vocab, etc. So it's definitely material to look at. Also, I was always very interested in world literature. So I had a fairly eclectic bookshelf that served me fairly well. But in these ways, I was always preparing. But the test in particular, the format, etc., I honed in only the last 4 or 5 days. So when I went to the test center, I wasn't really sure. I thought, maybe I'm going to do well because everyone told me my English was great. But the day of the test was quite something. There were so many people. There were sort of, it was very, very intense and grave. The whole environment, lots and lots and lots of people, really sort of serpentine queues, everyone doing some last minute reading. I thought it was, the CAT exam or something like that. The environment was very tense, and it was a particularly hot day in Mumbai, and the center was crazy crowded. So it was, I kind of was a little bit flustered, let's say during the test day. The recording devices, when they did tests, a whole lot of them were not working. People kept raising their hands and complaining. I wasn't very, very comfortable with the environment at all. So I thought the test was okay, but when I walked out, I wasn't fully confident. I needed a particularly high score because I was moving to Canada on my own, no family, no provincial nomination, no work experience, no education in Canada. So I was relying on a few core profile parameters to really bolster my score and my profile overall, so I had to do well. But on the day that I walked out, after doing my IELTS test, I didn't feel particularly confident. I knew I'd done well, but I wasn't quite sure I had maximized my potential to the extent, I should have or I needed to. So I was a little bit iffy. And when the test scores were announced, I think it takes 2 weeks for the online test reports to come through and about 4 weeks for the physical scorecard to reach you. But I got a 9 in speaking, 8.5 in reading and writing, and listening, where I needed to score the most. I needed an 8.5, I got only 8. So I wasn't ecstatic, and I knew that I had to do this again. Also, what I realized was that IELTS is not about your language, your acquaintance with the language, complexity, and all of that at all. It is strictly about the format of the test. You don't have to be a Shakespeare, as long as you acquaint yourself with the format and the specifics of the test and how it works. That's where sort of the golden key lies. And I realized that now that I knew the basic format and I'd gone through the rigors of the process once, that I would be able to do well the second time. So my sister was fortunately in an adjoining city called Pune in India then. So I decided, hi Shikadi, shout out, thank you for all your help. Then and for all the help that you continue to give me now. Shout out to all of you guys. But she was in Pune, and I decided that I was going to stay with her for about 4 or 5 days and then prepare and do the IELTS test again. So I remember it was Christmas and there was celebration in the air. Everybody was having a really good time, and I was sitting at home and preparing for IELTS. Albeit not so seriously, but I still had to sit and prepare and hunker down and give all of my time to preparing for IELTS. So I did that for an additional 2 or 3 days, and then the second time around I did my test in Pune. The center was a lot, there weren't as many people. It was a really big venue. It was, the air was a little bit more relaxed. Everything was, it ran like a well-oiled machine. So I was really happy with the venue and the logistics of how everything played out. I had also been through the test once. The first time around, it was completely uncharted territory because I'd never done an English language test before that. But the second time around, I went armored with a lot more confidence because I knew the whole structure of the test, just felt a little bit more confident, and also my physical environment wasn't as disconcerting. So I did relatively better the second time around. So I got 9 in speaking and 8.5 in all the others, which is perfect for me. So it kind of bolstered my score enough to get me an invitation to apply for permanent residence 2 or 3 weeks after I created my profile and entered the express entry pool. So that's how things transpired, and I have done the IELTS test one more time here in Canada since I came, and I had to do academic IELTS, and if you're wondering why I had to do it, it was for the purposes of getting my license to practice immigration. After you go, you study immigration, and then you give this really, really complicated test. You also have to submit an academic IELTS scorecard. And I think the requirement was 8 in all bands, which I did get. Academic IELTS I thought was a little bit more difficult than general IELTS, but that could be just my my sort of subjective opinion, but a lot of people have concurred and said yes, academic IELTS is a little bit more difficult. But I guess in terms of just the format and just how you approach the test, there isn't a whole lot of difference between academic IELTS and general IELTS. So that was my whole rendezvous with IELTS, doing it again, and then having done it multiple times since. It's required, all the time and in so many different life circumstances. And I know of so many people who've done IELTS so many times that it's almost exhausting. And also it's expensive. So over here it cost me about $350. So alongside the stress and the preparation and all of it comes also the financial blow, because it's quite an expensive process. But for a lot of immigrants who come to Canada without a foreign degree or an education, IELTS is something that you need to provide time and again to validate the fact that you have a fair acquaintance with the language, etc. So it's just a necessary evil. So that was my IELTS story, and having gone through the rigors of the process, I could give you guys a few quick tips, and I will do that in the second part of this video, just taking a quick break, but I'll see you guys on the other side with about 5 tips on what you could do for the IELTS test. Stay tuned. Hi guys, just a quick shift in corners. I'm back with the top 5 tips for preparation. If you are in the process of giving your IELTS test, then I am hoping that you find these tips useful. The first one would be paying attention to your vocabulary. So just being conscious of what you're saying, how you're saying it, and if you're saying it in an effective manner. Using words correctly in the right context. Common mistakes, say for example words like adverse and averse, where to use it and how to use it. Or there are sort of so many examples, but this comes from a very conscious processing of what you're saying and how better you could say it if you're trying to improve on your language, the complexity of your language, the efficacy of your language, all of it. So please pay attention to vocabulary and make discerning choices as far as words are concerned, okay? Because there you can say things in a number of ways, but there will be some ways that are more effective in parlaying what you're trying to say. So try combinations, permutations, just play with words, just love words in general. So pay attention to vocabulary is one. The second one is obvious but fairly sort of underrated in the whole preparatory phase is read a lot. Read quality content, so world literature, pick up books that have great writing and sort of focus on complexity of words and sentences and phrases. And reading is even outside the confines of test and all of this. It's always going to hold you in good stead and always going to be such an interesting, not just a hobby, but it's really a life skill. So reading is something that I would recommend to anyone and everyone. But if you are attempting the IELTS test in particular, it is an extremely useful ammunition, especially if you like reading. But read critically, read slowly, process everything, write down words that you've never heard before, go and revisit those words, try and make a very conscious effort to include those words in your vocabulary, see how words, sentences, etc. are strung together to create an effective narrative. There's so much that you are subconsciously imbibing when you're reading quality pieces of work, so make sure you read a lot. The third one is practice writing full-length essays. So writing is a particular problem because in today's day and age, of course, we are not writing as much, or the pen sort of and paper writing is pretty much considered obsolete, and it's a fairly archaic, dated concept today. So even if you have great language skills, etc., when you're actually there, I don't know now, they must be doing a lot of these things online, but if you're going to the venue and actually sitting down to write an essay, it can be particularly challenging if you're not used to the format of doing that. So write full-length essays, paper and pen, sit down, time yourself, and practice this way. You can't just be like, okay, so I have it all planned in my head and etched out, and I'm going to be okay. Practice writing the actual essay on pen and paper. Also your handwriting, spellings, punctuation, all of these minor things that can be easily overlooked do matter. So practice the entire spectrum of it, the actual writing, punctuation is what I mean. Punctuation, words, spellings, all of it. So actual writing is very, very helpful. The fourth one actually is also practice speaking and pronunciation. So the speaking test can be a particularly unnerving experience, the speaking module, because you actually have to go and talk to someone who's going to ask you very, very targeted questions about yourself and give you a topic that you have to present on for a minute, etc. So, it's already quite unnerving because you don't know what topic. You might be able to speak really well, but what if it's a topic that you're not familiar with, or a topic that's completely out of your realm of interest or work and stuff like that. So there are all of these overriding concerns. So you have to be well versed with talking and talking clearly, concisely, slowly. That was my problem because I always kind of rattled off. So I had to practice how to talk and present sort of really nuanced arguments, but also be slow and effective about it all. So practice speaking and practice pronunciation, especially for people who have what we call MTI or mother tongue influence. So the accent, if that's a little bit thick or heavy, or it's kind of heavy with your mother tongue influence, then you have to do a little bit of work trying to neutralize it. I'm not saying you'd have to suddenly start speaking with a twang and sound super anglicized about everything, but you have to neutralize it to an extent that the other person who's listening you can understand you clearly. In India, a lot of the speaking tutors, examiners, etc. are other people from India. But when I did the IELTS here, I had to make sure that the Canadian person who was listening to me really understood some of the words that I use, or that I was using the North American pronunciation and not sort of the British Indian pronunciation. So that got really complex here, but in India, just make sure that you are working on the accent and just neutralizing it a little bit. If you have a heavy sort of what we call MTI, or your own dialect, or your language of everyday use has quite a bearing on the way you speak English, try and perhaps listen to audio tapes of native English speakers, or people whose language of work is English, so that you get a fair idea of how it can be used in everyday context. And the last tip is practice full-length listening with audio tapes that are available on YouTube, or you will also have the CDs if you're booking from British Council, etc. Because listening is the one that gets really tricky. So you have to listen to audio tapes and answer about 10 questions, or whatever number of questions there are associated with the paragraph that you're listening to. So you have to work in unison. You're listening and you're keeping track of questions and answers. It's quite a almost a multidisciplinary one. It's quite challenging. So it only comes from practice. So do full-length audio tapes as far as practice is concerned, and don't stop when you fumble. Just keep going, because it'll give you a realistic idea of how much you're scoring, and also it'll be a simulation of what your real day test is going to look like. So be a little bit harsh on yourself when you're practicing, the listening section in particular, and make sure you're doing full-length audio tapes. And then, when you're redoing it again, use another audio tape so that it's not something that you're familiar with already. Listening, for some reason, has the maximum amount of score allocation, especially if Canada is your focus and you want to come to Canada. You have to score really, really well in listening, and somehow in the score calculator, the highest number of points have been allotted to listening. So it's particularly important in the overall scheme of things. So you want to pay attention to listening and make sure you are scoring the maximum. Okay, so for all of these modules, for all 4 modules of IELTS, the maximum score is 9, and 9 is considered, professional level of fluency. So I'm hoping that whoever's preparing at the moment and will be giving the IELTS test, that you do score 9, or whatever you want or you need. And I hope you prepare well. So this was my IELTS story, my own story with how I went about attempting my test. In hindsight, I mean, if I knew some of these things better, I would have done well in my very first attempt. But I sort of completely don't mind that I had to do it a second time, because it just, in a way, it sort of calmed my nerves a lot more when I showed up the second time around. And then, I've done it one more time since, and that's been a good sort of learning experience as well. So, I know that it is a little bit nerve-wracking, the whole exam, but a lot is about your acquaintance with the format, just how well you know it, and how calm you are on the day of the test. So anybody attempting IELTS, I wish you guys the best, and I will see you guys in the next episode with another interesting topic. I apologize for a bit of a hiatus, but I will be back with more content that is fun and informative, as I hope this one was. So until then, I'm sending you guys lots of love. I hope you guys are doing well. There's a lot going on around the world, but I hope you guys are well and safe, and I'm sending you guys love. I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye guys.